What happens, though, if 20 years from now the economy changes, demographics change, who knows what it might be, and suddenly this business is gone and you're saying, well, surely you put my $1.5 million in some sort of escrow account. And I think we know the answer is probably no. Don't expect that this money is going to be tucked away in an FDIC insured account. We see no evidence of that in the industry in Missouri or Florida. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. But you can do things to ensure that you're picking the right facility that will stay around for the foreseeable future.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen, Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell features guests each week to discuss prominent topics for those over 55. Here's Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week we're going to talk about a topic that I know many of you are interested in, and we haven't talked about it in a while. But we got a suggestion from one of our listeners, Irene, in which she said, why don't you talk a little bit about life plan communities? Sometimes they're called continuing care, retirement communities, essentially same thing. So we thought, it's been a while, and that's an issue that is becoming more pressing for some of you with every passing year. So we thought, Let's talk about it. Let's talk about kind of what's out there in general terms and give you some understanding of how this option would work. We'll talk a little bit about what the expense sometimes is. Again, we have to be vague because of the variation between quality and location and content of the deal, and the contracts do tend to vary. There are some common denominators we can talk about. So we'll give you a sense of what the benefits are, what are the drawbacks, what are the things you should watch out for, and really talk about some wonderful advantages that, it's an interesting conception as a place for people to be able to go and stay. And that's really the underlying attraction to this entire discussion, is that it solves the problem that people have as they age, where on the one hand, they are at a point where they don't need any particular special care, but on the other hand, they foresee that if they live long enough, there's a good chance they will. And there's a possibility that it won't simply be assistance, but it may need to be skilled care, which is a phrase that's used to refer to nursing homes. So how do you plan for something where there's that sort of potential variation and you don't know which direction things will go for sure? Well, that is the quandary that is solved, presumably, by this as an option. This says, come and live in our location, our campus, and this campus will allow you to start out wherever you are. You could even start out in skilled care, but it's really designed for somebody to take full advantage of the permanence of the location and the fact that it's okay to age, it's okay to need additional services, to need additional care. That's fine because we're equipped to provide that over time, whatever your level of need is. So you start out, most people start out in independent living. And over time, perhaps they feel, well, I need some assistance. And then you go to another level. And they may never go to skilled care. But it's a nice idea. You can see the attractiveness of this business model, of this residential housing model, we'll call it, for people who are older. So sometimes it's called a life plan community. Sometimes it's called simply continuing care residential community. So you'll hear us use those phrases back and forth. I just want to acquaint you with those terms. I want to remind you that it's very important to us to get subscriptions. For you to press that like button is helpful, but the subscribe button is the most important thing to us. And, we don't sell a product on here. Naturally, the show is sponsored by TuckerAllen, so we do talk about TuckerAllen. But to be honest with you, the efforts that we put into this show is something that is of personal value to us more than monetary, quite frankly. we do love to do it because we think that we're being of great value to many of you. Let us know that. You like us? Yes. But the most important thing we look at is subscriptions. So where should we start? I kind of gave you an overview. I will tell you I did a little bit of field work here. The field work was when I was in Naples, I looked at a couple of places. There's one prominent community there that I probably will not choose to mention just because I don't want to mistakenly say something that's not technically correct. So I have a little bit of concern about whether I might do them an injustice on something. This was a result of my visit, so since I want to talk about some numbers, that's my hesitancy. If I was just talking about the quality of the facility and things that I observed, of course I'm comfortable with that. But when I give you some numbers, I want to be fair to them, and maybe there would be some conditions where the money might be a little less, or you might be able to qualify for some sort of discount. So I don't want to get into that. So that's the reason I'm not going to name the community. Anyway, with us today, Ben Zinkel. So Ben, you'll know he's been with us. He's done several shows now, and he's an estate planning attorney with TuckerAllen. So he's kind of the authority in estate planning, and he's also has some particular knowledge in this field. He's researched it. He's dealt with it. So I thought this is good to have Ben join us and help us. So Ben, you suggested an outline for us to go through. With the introduction that I gave, maybe we can plunge in. Should we start by talking about regulations, state regulations, like Missouri? We'll focus on Missouri because we know that's where most of you are, but we'll mention Florida because I have a place there and I spent some time there. Plus, many of you, if you're considering a place other than Missouri, statistics are that place would be Florida. Lots of Midwesterners on particularly the west coast of Florida. So talk about the rules that govern continuing care communities, the regulations, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. In Missouri, Missouri has rules regulating these continuing care retirement communities or life plan communities, as they're called, and they're kind of all lumped into the regulations and statutes governing nursing homes and skilled care. So Missouri has a more comprehensive kind of all-in-one regulations and statutes with for continuing care retirement communities, as opposed to Florida. Florida has specific statutes that are for these communities. One of the biggest questions that you may have when you're considering a continuing care retirement community is, where is my money going? What are they doing with my money? And if they do go bankrupt or go out of business, can I get my money back, or is that gone? And in Florida, they address that head on. They require these communities in these facilities to have 30% of their operating expenses as a liquid cash reserve at all times to protect against that insolvency. They require any escrows that they may have to put in money into escrows, that they have pretty robust regulations on who can run those escrows, what kind of banks and trust companies can hold those funds. Whereas Missouri doesn't really have a lot of that. But for both states, it's pretty up in the air what happens when these places do go out of business or bankrupt. If they do go bankrupt, most residents would be considered unsecured creditors. And what that means is that once a corporation or company goes bankrupt, they declare what's called Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Or 7.
Or 7. But typically it's Chapter 11. And all that is kind of a negotiation among all of the creditors to see who gets paid first, and where all of the money, all the leftover money, can go as they're restructuring their business.
So let me interrupt you here. So just so you're following us, you can enter some communities by paying simply a monthly fee. There's a small down payment, but not a large one. There is that model, but it's clearly the minority of what you see out there. Most are based on a substantial front-end cost. I think the business reason for that is there are, especially in the last few years, concerned about changing costs of health care and housing and other expenses that these communities incur on a daily basis, because people's entire lifestyles, all those things you associate with living expenses, things that go into the consumer price index, those are all things that are being funded essentially, not all, but most are being assured by this community that they will cover those costs over time. And that's a scary thought. So many of them want to hedge their bets to allow for inflationary and other forces that might occur. And so they ask for a substantial front end. As to what that front end would be, it depends. The nicer places, and this is where I'll go to my example in Florida, there's a very nice place in Florida that has several locations, and particularly in the Naples area. And they're gorgeous campuses. I mean, the campus has a recreation facility. It has several restaurants. It has, of course, all the group activities that you could imagine that would be going on. They do that. They serve healthy cuisine if that's what you want, and there is a big push for healthy cuisine and healthy lifestyle generally. They have a shuttle bus that runs just continually throughout the day, going to any significant location that you may want to go in Naples. But there's so much on the campus. It's a huge campus. It must be not quite a mile square, but it's maybe a half a mile square. It's a big facility and lots of different housing options. You know, there are some low-rise, almost townhouse type properties, and there are others that are traditional condominiums. There are lakes, gorgeous views. It's a wonderful facility that has lots of stuff to do, lots of entertainment, theater, incidentally, as well as other things. So their approach is to say, look, if you're going to move in, we have a regular price, and for example, a 2-bedroom condo in such a facility that was 1,300 square feet, would have been about $1.5 million on the front end. Some of you are saying that can't be correct. Others are saying that seems very reasonable. I think those of you who think it's very reasonable are in the minority, but I can just tell you, with prices being what they are, that's probably not that shocking. Definitely, it would be cheaper in St. Louis, let me add. But if you're going to live in a place like Florida, I don't think that's a shocking number. So $1.5 million up front. It is partially refundable. And another reason that I don't want to name this facility is just because I don't know the details of the refund policy. I know that they do have a refund policy, which I think is that you can get back up to, say, 30, 40% back. And it may be a higher percentage. But this is an incentive for people who think, yeah, I know this is where I want to be. I feel confident. I'm not going to change my mind next month and decide to move out, because under those circumstances, you'd probably get nothing back or very little. I think that they have policies that anticipate if something happens to you early on, then it's a sympathetic policy. It doesn't sound as brutal as you might think. You give them $1.5 million and goodbye to that. And it's a policy that incorporates, special circumstances to some extent, but you could easily end up getting very little back, depending on how long you were there and the circumstances. So just be aware that when you pay that upfront money, yes, you could probably expect to get some substantial portion back. Now, there's another option, though. In this example I'm giving you, which was the 1,300 square foot 2-bedroom condo, you could pay almost half that, approximately half, $750,000. Now, the nice thing about the ability to pay much less is that for some people, that's the only way they can get in. Unfortunately, that's an amount that's pretty much non-refundable. It's all non-refundable, subject to special circumstances. And there are those hardship rules that if, for example, you were, say you're 85 years old, you move into this facility and you pass away a year later, or your mother or father passes away a year later. In that situation, you're probably going to get the bulk of your money back. They have a 5-year amortization. If you move out in the first, or if you pass away in the first 5 years, you get an amortization over those 5 years of the portion that you get back. So that's that's encouraging. It would otherwise it'd spook a lot of people with the idea of paying a lot of money and knowing they get nothing back. For the most part, with the $1.5 million, you are going to get something back for the vast majority of cases, and maybe something substantial if you've been there a long time. But as to the approximately half where you don't, the hardship provisions are if you die within the first 5 years, and then there's another for 7 years if you move out. But again, I won't call it a penalty. I'll just say the cost is substantial if you end up moving in and not staying, unless you pass away in the first 5 years. The moving out, you still are penalized, but you do get back a significant amount. But beyond that, there's nothing that's refunded. So it struck me as a reasonably fair policy, because it's a policy that sure, if you're not paying, if you're paying half as much to go in, and you're there for a long time, you shouldn't expect anything back. But if you have something weird that happens early on the front end, it's only right for them to not have a windfall profit, which is what that would be, a windfall profit because you or your relative passed away in the first 2 or 3 years. So that's the way that this one works. In addition to this money that you pay, there's also this monthly fee, and the monthly fee will vary wherever you are, but there will, without exception, I think, there will always be a substantial monthly fee. And it's around $6,000 for this, I'll call this a Class A or a 5-star facility. We'll call it a 5-star facility. $6,000 a month that's locked in, so there's no adjustments for inflation, et cetera. It's locked in. That's to cover some of the ongoing expenses. Now, all of your food expenses are probably not going to be covered in that, although the bulk of them will. The way that this facility, and I think all 3 of these facilities operate in Florida, is that they have some sort of continental breakfast set out in the clubhouse, so you can go in the clubhouse and you can, sit and visit and have, an inexpensive. They don't pretend that it's a full breakfast. Matter of fact, they don't advertise it as we provide free breakfast. Instead, it's just this continental arrangement with coffee and whatnot that a lot of people partake of, largely for social reasons. But you can make it your breakfast. And then there's enough money left in the budget. You get an annual amount per year that you have to spend. So it's spend it or lose it, which again, I don't think is too unreasonable. Because for them to operate these restaurants, they need people to use them. It's like the problem that country clubs have. Country clubs have a minimum that you have to spend. And some people say, well, I don't want to be in a country club where I have to pay this front end money to join. And then on top of that, I have to pay for these, this minimum expense per year. And sometimes it's expressed as a monthly, like $300 or $400 a month, depending on the country club. But in defense of the country club and in defense of these facilities, if you have people who join the club and don't eat in these restaurants, then they really can't have the restaurants. If they don't have the restaurants, then people will complain, well, we have these special events. Why would I be in a country club that doesn't have a great restaurant? So the only way that arrangements like that work, whether it's a country club or whether it's retirement community, is for them to have some incentive that, look, you need to come and eat here. So the way they do that in this case is that you have this budget, but you got to spend it each year. It doesn't just accumulate. And the amount that it works out to is a generous, high-quality dinner. It could be a lunch, but we'll say a dinner each day. But in fairness, the way it was explained to me, the sum is not intended to include literally, if you were to say, well, for this amount of money, $6,000 a month, I should be able to have 3 big meals a day. That's not built into that number. What's built into it is the assumption that you're probably going to have a pretty light meal that day, put aside breakfast, but you're going to have a light lunch maybe. You have a shuttle that goes to the nearby grocery store, which is a Publix, they call it. It's a popular grocery store chain in Florida and Southeast. So you can easily go there and you can get whatever you want to cook with. So people will. I mean, you have kitchens, and so a lot of people like to do their own thing. And that makes sense to me. It does, and it doesn't seem too unreasonable to me. So the $6,000, though, pays for everything else around the community. You're not getting dinged left and right for participating in sporting activities, et cetera. No, that's all going to be included. The gym, workout, group activities, et cetera. Now, where we were just a second ago and what Ben was talking about, I want you to understand it in the context of what I just said. sometimes businesses fail. And what Ben was describing to you is what are the rules related to these businesses that might fail? And what if you gave $1.5 million, and incidentally, these prices went up to like $8 or $9 million or higher, really, but they don't always have those available because there'll always be one or two of these real expensive units. But it would be really a sad thing to think that you could spend this money and 5 years later, this business, this facility goes bankrupt. And it's possible. And so the question that we start out with, which is something more that a lawyer's going to look at immediately on the front end, but for you, we have to work our way around to it to kind of get to that because we know there are other things you're interested in. But one thing that we went to and Ben went to initially when he looked at these communities was to look at, to what extent is this money protected? What if the business just went under 3 years after you move into it, or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 12? It could be way down the road. That's what's scary is you're betting that what may be 40 years of your life is going to be spent in this location with all these, these amenities functioning. And what happens, though, if 20 years from now the economy changes, demographics change, who knows what it might be, and suddenly this business is gone and you're saying, well, surely you put my $1.5 million in some sort of escrow account. And I think we know the answer is probably no. I don't think the law requires that, either in Missouri or Florida. Florida is more regulated than Missouri, as Ben was saying. But don't expect that this money is going to be tucked away in an FDIC insured account. We see no evidence of that in the industry in Missouri or Florida. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. But you can do things to ensure that you're picking the right facility that will stay around for the foreseeable future. Something that most CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities, do is that they will allow you to look at their financial statements. If you are looking into these facilities and this is something you're interested in, that's number one. Make sure that you are looking at their financial statements. If you don't understand them, take them to your financial advisor and they can explain them to you. You want to make sure that, first of all, that expenses don't exceed income. If they're running in the red, that's a huge red flag there. You want to make sure that they have some kind of reserve that they're using for operating expenses.
Also, how mortgaged is the real estate,
and how exactly, and what banks are mortgaging the real estate, and when how much debt they have indebted to financial institutions. You want to look for an occupancy percentage of everything that I've researched said about greater than 90% over the last 5 years. If these places aren't retaining people or they're only half full, that's another red flag, and that means that they could run out of money soon. So there are, and as always, speak with, like I mentioned earlier, speak with a financial advisor to see if this is something that you can do feasibly, and speak with a lawyer before you sign any contract. Have them look it over, make sure that the contract you're signing is up to snuff, and there's no hidden clauses or anything that would make you lose money that you probably shouldn't be losing.
So industry experts think that the ideal would be 90% occupied, 90% plus?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you buy in and you know that the occupancy rate is below what would be long-term profitability, something's got to give. And even if it's not a bankruptcy, such as the most extreme example we're thinking about, it could be in a way as bad, and that's that they really trim back benefits and they really trim back amenities, and things go unrepaired and quality of life deteriorates. At least if there's a bankruptcy, you confront it. Hopefully you recover some of your money. You are a creditor. You're not a secured creditor, but you're a creditor. But furthermore, you make the necessary changes to recover your quality of life that you had, hopefully somewhere else. It's not a happy scenario either way, so you don't want to be in that position. But my point is that even without a bankruptcy, it can be a totally unsatisfactory situation. And then in the face of lots of lawsuits, that's really what triggers the bankruptcy filing anyway, and it probably starts with those lawsuits of people feeling they're not getting what they're paid for, what they're paying for. Another thing that I would mention is there are facilities that have resident groups. So it's kind of like a homeowners association where they want to have a voice. These resident groups want to have a voice in the management and what the rules are of the facility, because this is their home, and so they feel, I've paid this money. It's kind of like I spent a lot of money in this neighborhood, and I should have a voice in my neighborhood. So that the same concept exists in these life care or life plan communities, and I think that it's a great thing. It's a good thing to ask about that when you tour. What mechanism is there for people who live there to have a voice in the operations? So Ben, something that ties in with this discussion is, how do you categorize these contracts? There is a terminology in the industry, a type A, type B, and this lady I was talking to incidentally in Florida, she said this is a type A facility, or a type A plan, she called it. And here I'm a lawyer, and I didn't know what she meant, because I don't deal routinely with life care communities. So you need to know some of these terms. Can you explain how that works?
Yes. So the type of contracts that you would sign for a continuing care retirement community depends on whether you're prepaying, putting a bunch of money down, as you mentioned with the place that you toured. It was a huge down payment, and that would prepay for certain things. So there's a Type A contract. This is also known as a life care contract. This is the one that you're putting down a huge prepayment up front, and then you have pretty expensive monthly fees as well for the services provided. But also, if you need skilled care or nursing care or anything of that sort later on, or while you're in there initially, that initial payment is a prepayment for all of those care services as well. The Type A contract is the most comprehensive, the most kind of overall best bang for your bucks, if you will. Of these communities,
it's the most comprehensive.
Yes,
maybe we could say that.
Maybe not the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, it could be. It could be the best bang, but I don't think we'd say that for everybody. It would depend on some of the factors we've already talked about. But it clearly is the most comprehensive.
Yes. And in the Type A as well, as I mentioned, you still have those monthly fees on top of that. The next type of contract is the Type B modified contract. This also requires a prepayment fee up front. However, it's not an all-inclusive prepayment fee. What it does, depending on the contract, you can either prepay for these nursing services and you get a discounted fee on them as you live in this community, or these communities will sometimes offer free days per year. So maybe 7 free days per year where you can go see a doctor, get your healthcare needs met, and that prepayment fee that you paid in your Type B contract would cover all of that. But it's not as comprehensive as the Type A contract.
And also prices are not fixed, generally speaking.
Correct. So they're not fixed. The month-to-month fees would go up depending on cost of living adjustments and things of that sort. So you're not signing something and committing to a monthly fee for the foreseeable future. Those would be subject to change as well. The next contract, the Type C contract, this is also known as a fee-for-service contract. This has a low buy-in. You pay sometimes a low buy-in fee, but it's not used as a prepayment for these healthcare services. These fees that say you needed to go see a doctor or use the healthcare facilities at the CCRC, those would be added to your monthly fees. So it gets you into the place and living there, but everything that you would spend money on if you did need extended care, that would be added to your monthly fee and would be cost you extra on top of the fee.
So you're essentially, they're not locking in anything for you. And again, sitting on the other side of the table, so it doesn't seem exploitive to you, is that in that case, they're just saying, look, whatever prices are, they're going to be, and whenever prices go up, we're going to raise your prices just like we would if you were coming into a restaurant periodically, from time to time. So in this case, though, as Ben said, you get in, and the prices, they may stay the same. it's not automatic that they go up. But if you have inflation, increased costs and stuff, the prices are going to go up. And you pay as you go. But you also have a shorter term commitment. Are these like 1-year contracts or?
I'm not sure, but that would make sense.
Yeah, you can expect that it's a shorter contract. So it's kind of like a lease. You move into a place, except you have lots of services that you can probably know on an annual basis what they're going to be, but you can't know what they're going to be next year or the year after. But the good thing about it is, and the incentive that these facilities have to keep you happy is that if they raise them too fast, you're probably going to move. On the other hand, some people, I guess it's the nature of this industry that people who think it's home and move in, maybe they're less inclined to move, actually, as I think about it. So there are incentives on both sides to try to work with those changes that will happen over time in what it costs to live there. So it's hard to judge whether one is better than the other. There's still this thing they call a type D. And what is a type D?
So type D is kind of the catch-all contract. The most common type D contract is a rental agreement. All that is you're renting out an accommodation at these facilities, and then all of the services, and you'll pay a monthly fee for probably some bare bones services,
utilities and whatnot,
et cetera. But if you think the amenities and food and everything is all a la carte, it's pay as you go, and of course the healthcare services as well. You would pay for those on top of any rental agreement you would have. Some other types of contracts involved in Type D contracts. There's also something called a continuing care retirement community without walls, and that's almost the opposite of a rental agreement. It gets you access to the services at these communities, but you don't have to live there. If you eventually do want to live there later, you kind of get an in to the community and may have discounted fees there. But that's the other contract there.
That's an interesting concept. I've never heard of that. So people live where they want to live, and at this central location, they have all these services that are provided for seniors.
Yes.
Huh. So one thing I didn't mention that this facility has that I'm using as an example here in Florida, and I think is common, such as you made reference to this a while ago, is that they'll have concierge doctors essentially, who you've already paid for depending on your contract. I mean, if you have a Type A contract, then that includes all your doctor visits, everything. At some point, if you have a serious expense, it's going to be picked up by Medicare if you have to be hospitalized or somewhere. And of course, then you would go somewhere else if it's a normal hospitalization. But still, in terms of your daily seeing a doctor, your personal doctor is right there on the property, all full time. Matter of fact, there are 5 or 6. You can meet with them and choose who you want. But I mean, they're all top physicians from a top hospital locally. It's a physicians group that's actually affiliated with the hospital. So probably the hospital owns the groups, the way it works these days. So, but this group rotates. It spends its time, its patients are in this facility. That's their entire patient base, I believe. So it's an interesting arrangement, and I can see how it's very attractive for a lot of people. One thing that we should touch on before we wrap up this subject is the whole idea of real estate ownership versus just a contract. Now, to lawyers, this is a big deal. Many times people who look at these, they don't think that way. But there is a big difference. Are you buying real estate? In other words, do you get a deed like you would if you bought a condominium? I mean, after all, you're paying $1.5 million. You'd think you'd get a deed, right? Well, the answer in most places is no. But anyway, if you buy a condominium, normally there's a deed. Alternatively, if there's not a deed, you're buying a contract. And it's it's a personal service contract that includes housing. So it's like you're leasing space coupled with a personal service contract. That means that if things go south, as we were describing a while ago, that you often lose your money. And this really ties in with the point we were making a while ago, and maybe that will make more sense to you that whenever you own a piece of real estate and maybe the neighborhood around you goes down, it might affect property values, but you still own your house and you can sell it for something. but not true for the majority of these deals. Can you shed some more light on that, Ben?
Sure. So speaking on whether you would own a house or versus just renting, if you sign a rental agreement, you don't own equity in it, and you would just be renting. Once you pass away, nothing would fall to your estate. When it comes to estate planning, though, whether you own equity in an accommodation or a condo that you buy at these retirement communities is important in planning your estate after you pass away. And again, it kind of just comes down to what type of contract you sign. Some contracts have in there that you own the house that you buy at these retirement communities free and clear. It will pass down into your estate after you pass away.
Particularly the freestanding houses, right?
Yes, yes, correct. And it'll pass down to your estate after you pass away, and then they can sell it and do whatever. Some have a little more restrictions on it where you do own it, but the retirement community itself has final say in who gets to buy and sell it, who gets to live in it. If part of their rules are that you have to be a certain age to live in these, then you can't, if you're a 30-year-old who just inherited this property, you can't go and live in it, and then you'll have to go through the facility themselves in order to sell it and try to find a buyer for it. So it does complicate matters a little bit if they do have kind of more robust rules. If these facilities have these rules that limit who gets to buy and sell property on their campuses.
One way to think about the idea of being restrictions on who you sell to, it have to be approved, et cetera. Think about those of you who've lived in places that have cooperatives. Missouri, it's not a popular means of ownership in Missouri. In Manhattan, it's very common. You have cooperative buildings. Well, those are actually owned units. Well, not the units themselves. They own an interest in the real estate. And so it is a real interest, but they own an interest in the whole. So still, they have this exclusive right to occupy the place that they live in. But here's the common denominator. You actually have to have a vote by the people in the building to approve, or the management or some committee to approve your buying that, or the person selling. Put it a different way, the person who's selling it, the buyer has to be approved. So it's a similar thing with some of these facilities. I know in St. Louis, one of the more reputable ones, there is a rule that you only get your money back when they sell it to somebody else. So that can be a little scary, because if the place has a bad reputation, or just there isn't a market for it too, then that means you don't have a buyer. And if you don't have a buyer, it means you're not getting any money. So on the one hand, when you would be told that you have an ownership interest, you have equity in this, but on the other hand, what good is the equity if you can't find a buyer who is going to pay the money that you want? And they have to approve this buyer. So you're really at the mercy of this facility. Now, on one hand, you can say, well, you're always at the mercy of whether or not you have a buyer. So that's probably not too fair a complaint. The problem is, though, whether you have a buyer is so much in the hands of the facility. So I guess that's what distinguishes it from normally when you own real estate. Normally, you always have to find a buyer. But finding that buyer is very much in the hands of somebody else. And a lot will depend on the reputation of the facility. But all in all, I'm not saying it's a terrible concept. I understand the idea. They're thinking that we need the money of the buyer in order to give you back your money. One thing it does tell you is this money must not be in escrow, because if it were in escrow, you'd think they could cut a check and then go find somebody to occupy your unit. But anyway, I understand that they do need operating capital, and this money is not being escrowed and saved. So that's a little bit of a red flag, but you can't really insist on that, because I don't think it's something that happens in the industry. So yeah, ideally, a lawyer that looks at this is going to say to you, likely for a facility you're looking at, is, it would really be much better if this money were escrowed in some insured account. I just think if the market doesn't offer that, all you can do is storm away. And it's that's not a satisfactory solution. So I think that people instead, they bet on the reputations of these facilities. They bet on their history. They bet on some of the points that Ben was making a while ago. You look at occupancy rate, you look at the history, you look at the financials, you look at what does their balance sheet look like, what are their debts relative to their income, so and their assets. So these are things that you can get a good feel for what lies ahead. But if this product that we're wishing for doesn't exist, or that you're wishing for, then you often move forward with the options you have. I mean, that's what we do, because the alternative is we continue living at home, and while that may be safer in some respects, in other respects it's not. So there's uncertainty in life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, we hope this discussion has been helpful to you. In many ways, I can tell you I'm a fan of these communities, but all of the cautionary points that we've raised, I encourage you to consider. But I also encourage you to look at these facilities and think about them as a realistic option in Missouri or in Florida or maybe somewhere else. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.